Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Backlog Banter. Today, we're talking about a very old video game that we both played for the first time. We come out from different places, but I think we have a similar experience with the game that we just played, and that is the classic Zelda game, Link to the Past. I have, for the last week or two, we've been talking about this game. Almost every time I've referenced it, I've called it Link's Awakening because I'm just a moron, and that's just been a joke between the two of us. But we played A Link to the Past. That is the video game that we played in the video game we're discussing today.
And here's what's special about that, actually. Tucker mistaking the titles is actually kind of emblematic of something that's going to make this discussion pretty interesting. This is not only both of our first times playing the game completely, this was Tucker's first traditional Zelda game.
Yep. I mean,
wanna...
I really do not have a lot of experience with the Zelda series. Yeah. My first one, I may or may not have tried Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker before I played Breath of the Wild, but it was around the same time. So, and I never completed either of those games, so I'm really not experienced with the Zelda franchise. And I played Breath of the Wild, obviously, but going back to Link to the Past was a little bit jarring at first, jumping back in time, the 25 years.
29 years.
20, almost 30 years. Wow. But Link's Awakening, shit! Exactly. You see what I'm saying? Link to the Past is a game that holds up surprisingly well.
Yeah, it does. For context, we both played this through Nintendo Switch Online.
Yep.
I've tried to play the game various times over the past few years, whether that's been on Wii U Virtual Console, 3DS Virtual Console, my SNES Classic. The time I finally finished it was for this discussion on Switch Online, and it just never really clicked with me before, regardless of the fact that I am a huge Zelda fan. Yeah. My top three being Wind Waker HD, Breath of the Wild, Link Between Worlds, which we'll talk about soon enough. Mm-hmm. And then I would say after that, we're probably factoring in the Link's Awakening remake, which I'll definitely be referencing a lot here. I'm not positive whether or not Link to the Past will make my top five. It might be fifth. But I think after playing it and completing it, I have a better handle on why it took me so many times to get into this one and what I like and don't like about it.
Yeah. Here's the thing. This is a game that whenever you talk to anyone who's, classic video game fan, what are the big important games? What are the best games you remember from your childhood, whatever. People older than us is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
They tout this game as an absolute masterpiece, defining of a generation, defining of a genre, all those things. And all those things are true in terms of it being defining. But I don't necessarily think that it is a flawless masterpiece, especially to someone who came back at it from having the experience of more modern games and recognizing where the series has grown and, how it was back then. Those are just the roots and not necessarily anything completely full, because I do think this is a game that does have its flaws. And I think that people who have nostalgia for it are pretty blind to those. And I think that that's something important to consider when thinking about this game.
I think it's a lot. It does deal a lot in context, because after playing it, as I tweeted about basically right after I finished the game, a sentiment I felt the entire time is that I would have much rather been playing A Link Between Worlds or the remake of Link's Awakening.
Yeah.
Or, honestly, even like a Four Swords. And I haven't played enough Minish Cap to really know, but from what I have played, I almost would have preferred to play that too.
Yeah.
Almost, you know what? I'll throw it out there. I'm a big fucking Phantom Hourglass fan. I would rather play that too, because I think what's important to frame this conversation around is, like you're saying, this game is very historically important in the fact that this is the game, not even Ocarina of Time, this is the game that laid the entire archetypical format for a Zelda game.
Yeah, and not only just Zelda games, I would say the adventure genre, right? It's not a typical RPG. There's not leveling up, but I mean the idea of exploring dungeons, of having the overworld connect to the dungeons, and there being special items that you get, all those things. Obviously, I'm not a complete video game historian, and there were probably examples of it before this, but this is really what popularized them. And seeing all these things, where they came from, is very interesting. But it also is worthy to note that it has definitely evolved over the years, and these are kind of the bare bones roots of said archetypes.
Well, I think it's important to remember, first of all, that you're stupid.
Of course, yeah.
But no. I think you're right in a lot of ways that Link to the Past modernized these things, quote unquote. But where they really got their start was games like the original Legend of Zelda on NES.
Yeah, of course.
Kid
I'm not
Dragon Quest.
I'm not discounting the fact that the original Legend of Zelda exists, but this is the real modern roots of them.
Absolutely, because this
Yeah.
is where we got the more traditional dungeon structure. This is where a narrative started being integrated into the story, the more itemized progression, the more cohesive sense of exploration.
Hmm.
A lot of stuff came from here, but you can also feel a lot of the more esoteric elements of the original Zelda in this game, which I think is where I got frustrated in some respects, which we'll talk
Sure.
about.
Yeah.
I think that Link to the Past, if you remove your cultural reverence for it, is a fun but fairly frustrating adventure game.
Yeah. And I would say I agree with that. I had a very good time with it. And one thing we have to bring up, I mean, we should have probably said this in the beginning. We both played it with heavy use of the rewind functionality
Yes.
on Super Nintendo Online. And whether that discounts our opinions or not, I don't care because we're the ones talking about it. But there are a lot of things that I do think were designed with obviously an older philosophy in mind, and the fact that the save system doesn't necessarily work great. You have to restart from other places when you start the game back up, and there's not like specific save points, which is fine. But also some of the bosses and the dungeon design and the more open-endedness of finding secrets in the world that are not necessarily obvious. You kind of have to wander and check every nook and cranny, which can be frustrating. And if you miss something in one random corner that you just didn't notice, it can mess up the entire progression of the game.
Yeah, here's the thing. Tucker was being dumb before. I'm fucking being stupid now, and I gotta call
Okay.
myself out for it. I'm not great at adventure games in this sense. I'm
Hmm.
not great at going off the beaten path to look for things. It's just not the way I tend to play.
Yeah.
I prefer to hop from dungeon to dungeon to hit the main beats and then do side stuff as it comes to me. And I'm really not good at solving puzzles like getting through Turtle Rock and getting to the final boss of Turtle Rock and realizing, oh shit, I think I need the ice rod, and realizing I don't have the ice rod.
Yeah.
That's on me. But I do think it's on the game in the fact that the ice rod is hidden behind a bombable wall in the corner of Lake Hylia, and unless I
Yeah.
completely missed it, no one tells you to go there to get it.
Well, that's the thing about this game, is that I do believe that in pressing the blocks on the wall where fucking so Shinnokula fucking tells you what he's thinking, what's going on in that little brain of his, or talking to the fortune tellers or talking to every NPC. I think there's a way to find out things like that. But
Yeah.
the fact that it is gated behind, you have to go 3-layer deep of exploring the world and finding the person who tells you a vague idea of where it is, and then you have to find that area and then find the specific thing which might be hidden behind a thing, and then you need that item that is hidden behind the thing to complete an area. I do think that well, it probably worked better at the time when it was more of a cultural phenomenon and people were talking about it, on the playground or in school or at work or whatever, or people had their Nintendo powers, people had their guides, things like that. I think that's where that comes from. I mean, you have the manual and stuff at your side when you're a kid in the 90s playing it, but for someone like me, I did have to resort to, YouTube walkthroughs and things like that, or looking up what the hell does this thing do, because a lot of these things in this game just aren't explained. And for someone going into it essentially completely blind, even to the Zelda formula, this is my first traditional Zelda game, there was a lot of times where I felt that the game design wasn't coherent enough for me to feel like I was really exploring my own way.
The, you're completely correct, especially when you're talking about and I completely agree with what you're saying about this being a game that fit better in the game design of the time,
Yeah.
where you've got your fucking Prima strategy guide and you can call the Nintendo Power
Mhm.
Helpline and you've got your friends to talk to and you flip leafing through the manual, because this game came out in a different era.
Yeah, of course.
NES games are designed fucking terribly, but really the word is cryptically.
Yeah.
And the reason they're designed cryptically is because those games are fucking short. If you knew what to
Hmm.
do, you would beat them quickly, and games were way more expensive then than they are now. There was a lot of reasons why game devs made their games more obtuse, so
Hmm.
players would have more reason to engage with them for longer periods of time. And that was a holdover into the next generation game philosophy. It really wasn't until 5th gen where things started to shift a little bit. So it's important to contextualize the game that way. But I think from a modern player's perspective, I don't mind a game not being handholdy. I think Breath of the Wild actually succeeds because it isn't handholdy. But
Yeah,
what Breath of the Wild does, in contrast to a game like this, is it doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't tell you how to engage with its systems. It doesn't tell you how to solve a problem, but it gives you alternate solutions to every encounter.
yeah,
There are different ways to solve any problem in Breath of the Wild that's going to allow you to think critically and creatively and in the context of the world. And it's not about, oh, wandering around and finding the very specific solution to a problem.
yeah,
So in Breath of the Wild, if I'd gotten to that boss, there would have been a different way for me to have fought him instead of realizing, oh shit, I don't have the ice rod. Let me go look over the entire map of Hyrule for it. So
yeah.
I think that's the difference in design philosophy, and that's where I come at it from a player and why I found certain aspects of this game more frustrating than fun.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to come off of Breath of the Wild, essentially, which is, you know, the Freedom Zelda game, obviously comparable to the NES original Legend of Zelda. But even as I'm playing through A Link Between Worlds, there's a lot of freedom in this game in terms of you can go almost entirely to any dungeon you want in any order. But this game has a tease of that. You can kind of go to certain places in certain orders, but there are ones that you have to have beaten another dungeon first. There are ones where you have to have found a certain item first. So it's that semi openness that kind of confused me, and I think ended up stressing me out a little more because I would end up, you know, I would, oh, I can go, I think I can go to any dungeon in any order, so I would end up trying to go to one, and then I would realize, oh, I don't have the thing I need to get in there. And even if I got in there, I would need to have something else to beat the dungeon. Or like, there's just like a lot of layers that overlap that kind of strip the feeling of freedom out of it because it is ultimately more linearly designed than it initially gives it at first impression.
But now, I mean, we've done a lot of criticism towards the game, but I think it's important to recognize that that really comes from a place of approaching Link to the Past differently than most people approach it from.
Yeah, of course.
Because everything you were saying was my experience too. I found myself entering a dungeon excited to see its design, but also worried that, oh, maybe I don't have the items. Maybe there's something that I was supposed to have that I wasn't told about that I don't have, so I'm not going to be able to complete it. Am I going to have to backtrack? What's happening? What am I really trying to accomplish here? But that doesn't make it a bad game
Oh no.
by any stretch of the imagination.
There's one last thing that I want to bring up that was one of my most negative points about the game, and then I think we can almost completely transition to the positives. Is the dungeon in the Lost Woods where you have to the fucking escort mission essentially. You have to
But
find yeah, you say?
just by the way, when I said I had gotten there, you're thinking of a slightly different dungeon.
Oh,
That
okay.
because that's the one in the Skull Forest, which is the Lost Woods equivalent in the Dark World, is the
Yes.
one where you're going into the mouths of the skulls and going underground.
Yeah. That's what
But
I was
the
talking about.
but the escort mission is in the dungeon after that.
No, I
I
don't think it is. I mean, you have
I'll
to
look it up for
find
you.
blind, right? In the fucking upper northeast corner of the thing. No, northwest corner of the thing, and you have to bring her through and then go into the dungeon with the light streaming in, and then she turns into the monster. But that dungeon where she says, "Hey, bring me up to the surface," right? And then you do that, and for me, maybe I did it wrong. I don't know. Nothing happened, and she just disappeared. And then when I looked it up, I'm like, where's the boss? I'm in the boss room, but there's nothing here. Turns out you have to get her and bring her to the room with the light for the boss to appear because she is the boss, whatever. And that I had to play through the dungeon a second time because the game was too cryptic for me to realize what I had to do. And maybe that's just me being an idiot, but the fact that it
No.
does have that pretty glaring flaw that you have to completely replay the dungeon essentially
Yeah,
in order
I
to get to the
mean,
boss if you mess up. I don't know.
that definitely it felt weird, especially since you're never supposed to actually take her outside. And I did just look it up. She's the boss of Thieves Town, which is the equivalent of
Okay,
Kakariko
whatever.
Village.
Well, that one then.
But I also dislike the one in the Skull Forest.
Yeah.
My biggest negative personally was actually that as the sequence from going Skull Forest, Thieves Den, Ice Palace. That run of three for me was really highlighted a lot of my issues. All right, hey everybody, we hit a little bit of a snafu, if you will, as we transition from the light world to the dark world, or more accurately, as
Ooh.
Tucker's internet fell off of a cliff again. As it happens, mine does too. College Wi-Fi is simply the worst. But as I was saying, I had an issue with the run of dungeons from Misery Mire through Ice Palace, because for me, they highlighted the way that the mechanics just didn't feel right. And this was my biggest issue with the entirety of Link to the Past. I thought Link felt stiff to control. I thought that hitboxes vacillated between being too generous and too precise.
Mm.
I found a lot of the movement to just not feel right. I didn't feel empowered. I felt like I was trying to hit enemies, but couldn't hit them, couldn't make contact. I felt like I was getting hit too often. I felt like the movement speed was a little bit too slippery, or I'd fall off of things too much. I just didn't have the level of control I wanted over Link. And I think that's partially because I've been spoiled by the later Zelda games, like A Link Between Worlds, excuse me, and even like the Link's Awakening remake, that I think give you a better control over Link, and that does a lot for the gameplay that I think was missing here.
Yeah, I can see that. I personally did not have experience. I actually very much enjoyed the controls of this game. I really like the using the Pegasus boots is
Yes.
one of the best sprints in video games. And also the charge up, the point, like using the just him holding his sword out to like hop while facing one direction. I think that's fun. I really like the spin attack is good. A lot of the game is I can understand it feeling stiff from the perspective of someone who is more experienced with the later Zelda games, but I really did not have an issue with it. And actually, I would say I'm on almost the opposite side of the coin, is that I'm playing A Link Between Worlds right now, and I'm feeling a little bit annoyed with the controls because of the introduction of full 3D movement, 8 directions, and all that. It's making it feel like I'm slipping a little more and feeling annoyed a little more in this game. But I think that just which came first, depending on your experience.
The cuckoo or the egg.
Oh, the cuckoo or the egg, yeah.
But now I think we want to talk about the positives, and I'm really
Yes.
curious to hear you go first, because a lot of the things you're going to say are just going to relate to the Zelda series as a whole, because this is your first real look into how Zelda was before Breath of the Wild. So I'm really curious what you liked about the game so much.
Well, for me, I'm honestly not going to say too much about Zelda tropes because in some ways I think these Zelda tropes in terms of world design and story and things like that I think are pretty weak. They are just it's a bare bones story. The characters are nameless, unmemorable, and uninteresting. The rescuing the girls from the crystals, you have to do it because it's the video game, not because you care about them. I mean, honestly, the story is pretty weak, and a lot of the Zelda tropes of the fact that it's just light world, dark world, get the Triforce. Oh, there was like there's wizards. It's all basic. It's base level Zelda stuff. Triforce, wizards, hero, ancient hero, whatever, master sword, but nothing of it really has any charm. But the game itself, I think, in terms of the overall design of the visuals are absolutely fantastic. I love the color palette and the sprite work is amazing. I really like the effects that it has. The sound effects are good. The beeping noise for when you're at low health can fucking kill itself. Whoever decided to put that in any game, Pokemon, Zelda, whatever, they need to be publicly executed. I'll go on record for that. But I really like the music a lot. Obviously, this is where a lot of classic Zelda tunes really originate from. But I mean, even taking something like the original Overworld theme from the NES game and giving it a richer feel because it's on the SNES, I think that track is fantastic and obviously very iconic. But a lot of this game is just very well made. In my opinion, it's not super special. I think it's a very base level game, but everything about it and the fact that it did inspire so many games after it, I absolutely enjoyed.
Here's what I want to say very first. We were talking about this a little bit before we started actually recording. I'm really excited for you to play Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker or Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, literally any of the, or Majora's Mask, I don't think I said that, any of the 3D Zelda games
Yeah.
that have actual fleshed out stories, actually interesting characters.
Yeah.
Because, like I was saying, this is very archetypical Zelda. This is
Yep.
where the team started to hammer out what the core concepts of the game are narratively and world building wise, but then they really put spins on them in the 3D games.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be really interesting for me to watch you experience those. And this is fucking news to you and the audience, but I think we should play through a lot of the major Zelda games over the course of the end of this year, next year for Zelda's 35th. I think that'd be a ton of
Sure.
fun.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be really fun to see you experience some of these games and give me an excuse to finish the ones I haven't, like Ocarina of Time, which should probably lead to me being executed right next to whoever created that fucking low health indication noise.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, what did you think gameplay wise in terms of going to dungeons, in terms of the overworld, the way they interface? Because this is not how Breath of the Wild carries itself.
Yeah, of
So I'm
course.
curious what you thought of that structure.
I am not. I'm not a huge dungeon fan.
Sure.
I and obviously I think that comes from the fact that I didn't grow up with Zelda type games. And Breath of the Wild was my first introduction to that, where obviously dungeon takes a pretty big backseat, and the puzzles overall in terms of the shrines are very bite sized. But I remember playing Wind Waker and Ocarina 3D, and just being a little bit frustrated that I was shoehorned into, it was either open world where there was basically no puzzles or completely puzzles focused. And this game, I think maybe because I am more experienced as a gamer and have more, I'm better, I know what to better expect from the game. I didn't mind it as much, and I thought that some of the dungeons were actually pretty fun. I like that each one sort of has its own mechanic, and I honestly I didn't have a problem with the ice dungeon. People make fun of that dungeon all the time. It was fine. I mean, ice physics are kind of obnoxious, but it's thematically appropriate. Um, but the idea of, I really liked finding a chest and getting a new item that would expand, almost Metroid style, of what I can go back and find new areas and discover more secrets. I'm very into that. I'm the opposite of you. Is I love to do side content, just interspersed as much as I can. I am playing Link Between Worlds so much because of how integrated its side content is. The My collecting is just a huge turn on for me. I love that. Um, but overall, I really did have a good time with just the basic mechanics of this game and the overall design philosophy of having to discover new items and things like that. I think that is a very rewarding system that was obviously very influential.
So actually, in some Zelda games and in a lot of games, I find the overworld exploration more compelling than the dungeon
Yes,
content.
and that's what I think I was trying to say with Link
Yeah.
to the Past.
But for me, when a game presents a very clear main quest line that wants you to hammer from beat to beat to beat, I tend to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to follow the motion of the ocean of the game design. Breath of the Wild is a game all about slow exploration. It took me about 80 hours to beat Calamity
Yeah,
Ganon. Obviously, you don't need 80 hours to beat Calamity Ganon. And if you're just not even ziplining straight to Hyrule Castle, but just following the Divine Beast and going there, it's not 80 hours.
yeah,
But that's a game that encourages that kind of exploration. Link Between Worlds encourages that kind of exploration. I spent a lot of time collecting the little fucking snail buddies and all the things you can do in that game, getting heart pieces.
yeah,
Here, though, I thought that the way that they really railroad you through all of the dungeons in the back 2/3 of the game as soon as you get to the Dark World felt a little ham-fisted for me.
mm-hmm.
But I do think that on the whole, excluding the 3 dungeons I really take issue with, I think these are incredibly well-designed dungeons
Yeah,
that hit a really nice balance between puzzle solving and combat and introducing new mechanics and relying on old mechanics.
mm-hmm.
And I thought that Ganon's Tower in particular was awesome. I love
Yeah,
the way Ganon's Tower synthesized together all these different gameplay elements and brought back old bosses and really made it feel grand in scope. I really did love that dungeon in particular.
yeah. And having like a ending dungeon or ending boss area, whatever, sort of be a culmination and recap of the entire game has always been something that really, it makes me experience the game more as a cohesive whole, and makes it feel punctuated at the end. One example being Mario Odyssey, where you have the Moon Tower, whatever, the darker side, I think it is, where you have to fight all the bosses again, sort of recapped, and then it gives you this big finale of all the coins, and it's like, thank you for playing, and that whole area just makes me like that game so much more, and appreciate the thought they put into it. And Ganon's Tower is that. I mean, the fact that you have to fight that boss where you hit the tail again, and you all those things where each level sort of recaps each dungeon's mechanics, and that really was a special thing for me. And while I'm not a dungeon fan overall, like I would prefer to puzzle solve in the overworld as opposed to being shoehorned into puzzle solving areas. I really did not mind these, and I enjoyed the game's mechanics so much that it pushed me through, and I was having a good time, no matter if I was puzzle solving or exploring the overworld.
Yeah, I think that they execute on their concepts really well. I think when you get into later Zelda games, you get much stronger theming that I think makes the dungeons more fun. especially the dungeons in the 3D Zelda games, are really interestingly themed.
Hmm.
These felt a little bit more generic, but again, archetypical Zelda. This is where those foundations came from.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that the usage of items here is really great. And I have to give a shout out to the Cane of Samaria,
Yeah.
because that is not in later Zelda games. So
Hmm.
that was a really fun treat for me to experience this mechanic that I had never played with before. And it really is a testament to, I think, how creative and forward thinking the developers were. Because, like I mentioned to you a couple times, the majority of these ideas are reused in not only Link Between Worlds, because it's pretty much a
Yeah.
sequel, but Link to the, I almost said Link to the Past. I meant Link's Awakening this time.
Aha.
Or, the 3D games. Really, every Zelda game draws so heavily from a lot of the concepts here, which I think is, again, just testament to how strong the game is creatively.
Yeah, and honestly, you brought up a point that I completely had forgotten about, and I said I like the items so much, but I'd like to elaborate, is the fact that the items in this game, while it might be a little bit obnoxious the way you find them, because it is rather obtuse, as we touched on, they're so diverse and so useful that it's just mind-blowing. The one criticism, and I'll talk about this later, I have with Leap Between Worlds is the items don't feel as special, and they definitely don't feel as useful because in A Link to the Past you have such a diverse, inventory, and you have the cape, which makes you invincible. You've got the Rod of Samaria or the Cane of Samaria, whatever, like you said, which I had never had an item like that in a video game. That was really fun to use. You have the Book of Madon or whatever the hell,
Man of
which,
Medan,
yeah, which you
Dark
can
Pictures Anthology.
translate. You can translate things with, and obviously the ice rod and the fire rod having their own uses. And I really like the items in this game, and the fact that I filled up my inventory at the end was in the completionist in me was very satisfied with that.
Yeah. I mean, I get, the thing is that there's a lot to praise about a game that is this elegant in its design. And by the same token, there's a lot to criticize about it due to the fact that they iterated on themselves and made their own ideas better.
Yeah,
It's the same argument or discussion we have with a lot of Naughty Dog's games. Naughty Dog wrote the playbook for how to make a really strong, formulaic but really strong third-person action adventure game.
yep,
And then they iterated on themselves each time, so their own product got stronger, which made their previous work look weaker in comparison.
yeah,
And that's the exact same story with the Zelda franchise. I think when you get to the 3D Zelda games, to fucking bring them up for the umpteenth time in this discussion, they do a little bit more to differentiate themselves, each with their own set of mechanics and interesting concepts. But this game is so much about building the foundation upon which the house will be built and rebuilt over and over again.
yeah,
And there's only so much I can say about the foundation for a house. Hey, look, there's concrete. It's really well put together. It's really solid. You can't have this other stuff without the concrete foundation in your home. You can't have Wind Waker. You can't have fucking Skyward Sword, Spirit Tracks, Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. You can't have all of these games without Link to the Past. So even though I find myself not particularly compelled to go back to it when I could go back to the other Zelda games, there are few games that are more integral to Nintendo's progression as a
yeah,
company and as a publisher and as a developer than Link to the Past.
yeah. And honestly, hearing you go, I use this in reference a lot, but it's sine wave of just positivity and surprising negativity. I'm surprised you enjoyed this game so much. The fact that you are so experienced with the Zelda series, and while this is clearly the foundation and you have criticisms with it, I looked at your list of games you played this year, and you made glowing reviews of Sayonara Wild Hearts and A Short Hike, but cards in the corner. But you put a link to the past over those, and I'd really like to know why, like, what this game connected with you even more than games that you did such glowing, perfect reviews on. Like, you didn't have much to criticize about Sayonara Wild Hearts or A Short Hike, but you still put a link to the past over those.
A Link to the Past is a game that, as few games in the industry do, created an entire genre and laid a framework that's so strong that it continues to be fun and transcend generations of game design. And even though it's been iterated upon, you can't go wrong with a Zelda game. And you can't look at A Link to the Past and look at how creative the developers were and understand that even though it has been better, this is incredible in its own merit. Because if I
Hmm.
were to put any of those other Zelda games we talked about, those would have been above A Short Hike, and they would have been above Sayonara Wild Hearts
Sure.
by a magnitude of 10. Those would have, my fucking top list of games for 2020 would have been those Zelda games we just listed.
Yeah.
So it's a question of magnitudes. It's a question
Sure.
of A Link to the Past being a weaker Zelda game for my personal ranking, but being a Zelda game in my personal ranking
Yeah.
instantly puts you ahead of 90% of what this industry puts out.
Yeah.
So that's where I come from. And the reason I'm critical of the game is not because I dislike it, but because I like those other games exponentially more.
Sure. Yeah.
So
And
that's the lens I view the game through, the lens of truth through which I speak, to use some
mhm.
Zelda reference.
I think that was the key I was missing. Look, I'm a weird Nintendo fan. Okay, I am certainly a Nintendo fan, but my Nintendo history is almost entirely just Pokemon and Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
And I am going back and experiencing Metroid. I'm introducing myself to the Metroid and Zelda franchises, which are two of the most influential and groundbreaking franchises of all time. And hearing you glow about it, we have not really had Zelda conversations because I'm
Yeah.
not super experienced with the series. So honestly, I did not even realize that you were such an insane Zelda fan that you are. Because in my eyes, as someone who is not as connected to the series, I really enjoyed Link to the Past, and I think it's a fantastic foundation. But when I think back to experiences like Sayonara Wild Hearts or Short Hike, those games just have so much more impact on me, and I feel like they are so much more tightly designed that I have to put them, and the overall experience was so much more enjoyable to me that I have to put them over. But I can understand you being, hey, I enjoy the Zelda formula so much that it doesn't matter if it's a weak Zelda game, it's still a Zelda game and it's fantastic. So, that's obviously its own merit.
Yeah, it just goes the other way because Twilight Princess defines a period of my life. Wind Waker HD defines a period of my life. Phantom Hourglass defines a period of my life. Those are games that defined those console generations and defined the games I was playing in distinct moments. Never forget 8th grade playing Wind Waker. I'll never forget finally getting my copy of Twilight Princess and coming home in elementary school. And there's a puzzle where it's like a chess piece type puzzle. And my family computer was upstairs. I was a little kid. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have my own phone. So I was downstairs playing the game and then running upstairs to figure out the next step of the puzzle and running back down to the next thing. And so all of these games have so much personal value to me
Yeah,
and so much resonance. And this is the game that they owe all of that to.
of course.
And me going back and seeing that and seeing where the series came from and understanding that, yes, all of my critiques I have of this game only come from the fact that I have so much love for the games that succeeded.
Hmm.
If I hadn't played those, if I had just played Link to the Past, it'd be a completely different conversation, you know?
Yeah,
But I didn't. This is the order that I experienced the games in.
yeah. And look, coming off of that, obviously I'm coming from a completely different angle, but I'm very, very excited and happy that I played this game. That I might not be super glowing about it, but it got me used to and interested in the Zelda formula. And now that I'm playing a game that, spoiler alert, I like a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
but it's getting me into the Zelda formula even more. And I'm thinking about asking my brother to mail me my copy of Wind Waker HD. I have Ocarina 3D in my 3DS case right here, and I'm thinking about, man, I really want to play those games, and which is very fun as someone who hasn't really gotten into a series in a while. I've got all these big games coming out, like playing Avengers now, or waiting for Cyberpunk or Mario 3D or Hyrule Warriors, but I want to play these Zelda games, and that's something I never thought I would. That's not something I never expected to really think. And I'm very excited for the future if we end up do complete playing through the series and can talk about it. You will be able to go through, viewers and Abram, be able to go through and watch my growth as hopefully a huge fan of the Zelda series going forward.
And I'm very excited to go on that journey with you. I get to go on two parallel journeys that I'm very excited about through some of my favorite things in the entire world. I get to go through Zelda with you, then I get to go through Star Wars with my girlfriend, who doesn't know what happens at the end of Empire Strikes Back.
I don't believe that.
I swear to God, she doesn't know,
That doesn't make any sense.
which is incredible. So I get to see her experience Star Wars. I get to see you experience Zelda, and I
Hmm.
get to fucking sit here and watch 3D All Stars install on my Switch.
Well, on that exciting and enthralling note, I think that's about it for our discussion. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Go play A Link to the Past. It's on Switch Virtual Switch Online,
It's
NES
so
Online.
accessible.
Yeah, it really
It's
is,
so accessible.
especially with Rewind. And don't feel bad about using Rewind. Look, we're role models. We're the arbiters of taste. That's obviously our classic nomenclature. But play the damn game. All right.
Play the goddamn game and play with Rewind. First of all, anyone who says that you're not really beating a retro game if you use save states to Rewind can go fuck themselves, because it's just so exclusionary. Play the game how you want to play it. Play with Rewind. If you get killed by a boss in a dumb way, if you get knocked off by Molduga and you have to fall back down layers of the fucking dungeon, just Rewind. Have fun. Play the game, have fun, enjoy yourself. That's all I have to say. And of course, don't forget me. I don't like how quickly that happened. I don't think you actually took a shit. I don't like that you tweeted at me while you were shitting. I don't like anything that just happened.